So we've had quite a full year with some great presentations, and we got two tonight to wrap everything up. So thanks everybody for coming. I know it's a very busy time of the year, and welcome to those who have joined online. Here we go. So just a reminder that we are recording the event tonight, and also to point out that, especially for those here in the room, those mics overhead are live and they're very sensitive. Now, the good thing about that is that when you ask questions, and we do like our meetings to be interactive, it will pick up and it will be on the recording. People online can hear it, which is great. The downside is that if you have any private conversations with yourself and whispering, even if the rest of the room isn't disturbed by it, the mics are going to pick it up quite well. And, so if you start talking about your company secrets, yeah, it's going to be that's absolutely right. So just be aware of that, please. That's great. Okay, and this segment, as those who come every month know that we do a little bit of a 10-minute roundup of news. Damien goes through all of the big headlines that have happened in Azure over the last 30 days or so, and highlights the ones that he likes the most. So, I said the ones you like most, because there's just so much happening in Azure. So that's what this bit's about. But just wanted to shout out our sponsors. These events are free for you to attend, but they're not free for us to put on. We need things like we need a venue, like this room. We need pizza and beer and things like our meetup subscription and all that kind of stuff. So we really want to shout out our sponsors who do that for us. So Codify gives us a monthly stipend to pay for all of those expenses. Microsoft gives us a room for free, and they even for free give us a nice friendly host who's here from Microsoft to make sure that we don't trash the place, because that requirement that of being here. So we very much appreciate the support from both of those companies. This is a community group, and we welcome participation. We welcome people who definitely want to come up and share something with the community. And if it sounds a bit intimidating or daunting, keep in mind, it doesn't have to be a whole length presentation. You don't have to do an hour with 150 PowerPoint slides or anything like that. If you want to get up and talk for 10 minutes about something that you've done that's interesting in your company and you want to share, we welcome that. We can plug you in. So please come and see us. As I said, we're wrapping up this year with Mike and Ranjan, but then we have already have January and February booked with some great topics coming up. And those of you, if you haven't seen Todd Whitehead present before, you're in for a real treat. So he's another Microsoft person who's here, and he's got very interesting. If you've got a topic, you can email that email, or you can put something in the message on Meetup. There we can get the messages for us, or just talk to me or Damien. We're happy to hear about it. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Damien, who's going to tell you all the latest news.
Starting with bad news first. So this one's only very short. There's a few things just to keep note that are coming to the end. For those of you that are using .NET, be aware it's starting to move really quick now. So very different to the .NET framework. So we've got .NET 6 coming end of life. 12th November. It's a date to be aware of. That's the long-term support version of .NET Core. And we got .NET 7 coming end of life in May. High performance VPN gateways will be retired on 30th of September 2025. It's a bit further out, but yeah, any of those that I come across that seem relevant, I try and sort of plug that so you get a bit of a runway to do something about it. And so .NET 8 is now here. So GA, that's great. Static apps, sorry.
Oh, sounds like somebody came off mute.
Anyone got comments? No? So anyway, Azure Static Web Apps now supports .NET 8, so go at it. That's pretty much it. So this one here is one that I saw and I thought, wow, we're starting to really get there. Azure Integration Environment preview. It's preview, so it's not GA yet. don't use it necessarily for your production workloads. But you can now build bottom up, which is what I really like about it. You can hook in your logic apps, your APIM, your service bus, and you can start creating those business processes very early days. It's going to start evolving and it's going to have more abilities in that business process construction. And you can actually start tracking individual events that are flowing through your business processes and where they're at in those business processes, what logic app, where they are, the service bus. So you can actually get that visibility down to the actual individual event level. Pretty from what I've seen, I haven't actually used this one, caveat. From what I've seen, pretty easy to pick out different data points and surface those data points up through the Azure Data Explorer. As a result, you have to bring your own Azure Data Explorer and you attach it into it. But it's looking pretty good and it's got some momentum. So that's my pick for the month. Application insights, enhancements to Azure Logic Apps have gone GA. We've got Azure Logic Apps now supports .NET Framework. Yes, that is .NET Framework, the old one, not the cool one. So it's trying to get some of that BizTalk workloads up into Logic Apps and given that question. There's trouble. So Dan's the expert in. I'm in trouble now. When Dan puts his hand up.
No. I was just going to add that the reason why that's significant about the .NET framework is because if you had logic apps that were using like custom functoids and things like that, it ran on the old .NET framework. So the new logic apps weren't able to run a lot of that stuff, but now
yes,
that's
absolutely, which is really good. And so helping that evolution of bringing that BizTalk stuff up into logic apps and writing in .NET code. So they did mention that they were targeting .NET 6, which yes, I just told you that's retiring. So we might see that very soon. Hopefully they quickly come on along with the .NET 8 version, but that's just rumor at this stage. So I won't spoil this one too much. There may be a presentation very soon about this. Not looking at anyone in particular. So Logic Apps, Data Mapper, Azure Functions, SQL Trigger. So that, just more ability to connect in and do lots more stuff with the SQL Trigger. It's actually using it's change tracker to actually pick up and connect in. So going off that change tracking data. AKS. So I don't know how many people are deploying 5,000 nodes in their AKS cluster. Probably everyone here, I'm assuming. But if you did need that, we can now do that. So that's pretty cool. AKS support for API breaking change detection. So it's going to alert you and give you information of when those APIs are breaking and what you're using. So you don't, it's just more visibility into what's going on from AKS. Cost previews for standard and premium tier previews. So just getting more of that granular view into AKS and what's going on and how much is it costing you, which is pretty cool. Couple other ones that are just really quickly. Progress SQL Flexible Server Enhanced Disaster Recovery preview. So you can just see there that you can promote servers to primary and starting to get more usability if you're using Postgres. There's a few new virtual machines that came out, gone GA. So medium memory machines, if that's attractive to your virtual machines.
Just spin up on the bottom one just for a demo for us.
Yeah. What's your username and password? Yeah. So sorry about that. Just left that slide in there. couple of resources that we sort of promote. So the Slack channel, we got a YouTube channel. This will be on the YouTube channel. So if you want to have a look at it later on, it will be there. Some training links if you're looking to learn. Blogs that are pretty cool. So the Azure one, obviously I go to that one a lot. A few others that are of note. And without any further ado, so it's really quick tonight. So we have Mike. So Mike, working for Flat Circle Software, he's going to show us some database deployment as code, which is something that I'm really excited to see. We need more database deployment as code. We need to get more into that space. So that's going to be really good. So Mike's going to come up first, and then followed by Rajan Mishra. And he's going to demonstrate the data mapper that I may have already spoiled the presentation, and I apologize. So, welcome. So, Mike.
Yes. Yeah. If you guys over on this side, you might find it better to be on this side. I'm going to spend a lot of time inside the room tonight because we're a small crowd. Get a bit of experience. Okay, great. We'll get started on there. So thanks, Damien. My name is Mike McGarry. I do work for a company called Flat Circle Software. And I work with a few clients in the investment management industry, focusing on helping them writing software and also working with their clients as well. And tonight, we've been fortunate enough that one of the clients I work with, Ombre Advisory and Investments, was kind enough to allow me to walk you through some of the work we've been doing together in terms of deploying databases code. And so Ombre are an investment manager. They specialize in family offices and high net worth clients. And they also have a number of UCITS funds, which are funds you can invest in yourself. And they specialize in something called exchange traded funds in terms of how they do their investment management. So what I really wanted to do tonight was, instead of just focusing purely on an Azure functionality, I want to try and bring together a real life business use case around trying to understand how to model your investments in ETFs, and combine that with some Azure functionality, which we're going to look at. We're just going to look at repos, pipelines, and Azure hosted databases, and then also some software development techniques. And that's the deploying databases code on Azure, to make sure we have a consistent, repeatable deployment of our database, so we can use it locally or in the cloud, and no matter where we use it, it's exactly the same. So what I want to do first is walk you through the use case. So an exchange traded fund is a fund that is listed on an exchange, right? Like the ASX, the Australian Stock Exchange. And often those ETFs, for short, have a number of constituents inside them. So a very common ETF is the Vanguard Australia Shares ETF, and that just basically tries to track the top 300 companies on the ASX. So the biggest companies in that fund are going to be things like Commonwealth Bank of Australia, NZ, Westpac, BHP, all the big Australian companies. Other ETFs, though, will actually have inside them another ETF, and can actually get quite nested and quite recursive. So as an investment manager, if you want to understand what your holdings are, you might want to navigate all the way through that fund structure to bubble up all the holdings that you have. And that can actually be quite a challenge, because the data you need to do that isn't necessarily easily accessible. You have to spend some time trying to find that information about what is inside each ETF, what holdings do they have. And then secondly, once you do manage to find and store that information somewhere in a database, how do you go and extract that information in a way that you can present, here's my holdings and here's them aggregated together or split out? Because I might hold, Apple in multiple places through multiple different lineages. I want to group those together, so my underlying exposure to Apple as a total, but also I want to keep it separate as well. So how do we do all that? So a key component is, of course, going to be a database to store the data in. So we're using MySQL. And what I want to show you here is how we deploy to the MySQL database in a way that's repeatable, version controlled, and allows us to have a really good local development experience. So if we're trying to make a change to our functionality for our use case, it's really easy for us to make that change and play around with it locally with no risk of impacting production data, right? Gone are the days being able to just log into the production database and muck around trying to make a change. It's far too risky. So We want to have the confidence though, when we do it locally, we have exactly the same setup as we do in production. There's no difference at all. That's the first thing. And the second thing is we want to be able to continuously deploy our changes. So we don't want to have a huge release cycle where we make a change and then we have to wait, weeks to go through a testing process in UAT before we can push it through to production. We're going to be able to work very quickly, make changes, deploy them, test them locally, and then those tests should run in a pipeline that deploys to each of our environments. And it should just go through deploy to dev, deploy to UAT, deploy to prod, all done in 5, 10, 15 minutes, something like that. And we can make multiple releases a day if we want to. So to start with, what I'm going to show you is the repository in Azure repos that we use for this. So this is a Python repository that contains the code that we use to deploy our database. So we're going to go into this on the database folder here. We're going to have a look at the scripts we use to deploy. So if we go into deployment, you can see in here we have a number of scripts. So what this represents is all the steps we've taken through the whole history of this database to set it up. So if we wanted to produce the database today, we will go through every single one of these steps to produce the database exactly the same. We're not saying, hey, this is the state of our database now, and we deploy that somewhere. We're saying these are the steps we took to get where we are today. So if we had a database that had one, none, or almost all of these deployed already, we could still deploy this and get to the same end state, which is really, really important. And we'll walk through in a moment the ways we ensure that when we do deploy, we're not going to end up with a different result each time we deploy, right? If we run the deployment over and over again, we should end up with the same result. We should end up with changes. So let's have a look at one of these scripts. This is the first one that we ever wrote. And this sets up some tables. Oops. So you can see here we've got some tables we want to set up. So in this use case, we talk about securities that are listed on an exchange. We need to know what the securities are. So we have a table that has the identifiers that we can use to identify our securities. So in financial markets, there's a number of different securities. Some are ISIN, which is International Securities Investment Number, CDOL, Stock Exchange Daily Official List, RIC, Definitive Instrument Code. Basically, there are a wide range of instrument identifiers that are available. So we want to keep track of what those are and whether or not they're unique, because some instruments have the same value from identifier and some can't. Only one instrument has that value, that identifier. So we want to set up a table that has a type, which would be like ISIN, whether it's unique or not, which would be true or false. The description, might be some more details, and we set primary key as the type, so we can't have more than a type more than once. But this is something you might run if you were to have a database. You could just run this directly right against your database and set this table up. We're not going to run it manually. We're going to put it in this file, in this script, and then what this allows us to do is we can deploy this to our database, and it will run this against our database and set up our table. So let's go ahead and we'll do that now live on my local machine. So I'm going to switch now to PyCharm. And we also have a tool called MySQL Workbench. Open. Not open. We will open it. And MySQL Workbench just allows us to interact with our database, whether it's locally or in the cloud. But in this case, we're going to be interacting with the local database. And I'll open this up in here. Might be a little bit small. Yeah, sure.
The signature is not on the online site.
Oh, is it?
Okay.
No, it's sharing. The screen share. I can see it in here.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry?
It doesn't on the Mac. It doesn't seem to frame it like with the red.
Oh, you can see the red rectangle. Is that what you're looking at?
Sort of originally.
Did it? Oh, yeah, okay.
I think I was thinking the same thing, but.
Yeah, Dan's onto it.
Thank you. Thank
Told
you.
us.
Good thinking.
We've gone through a whole presentation before we realized you weren't sharing.
I'm not sure I can zoom in too much in this one. That's right. So we'll go back to our PyCharm. We'll zoom in on this one. So in here, I'm going to go to the same place we just were in our deployment folder. This is our script we were just looking at. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually deploy this to my local database, and we're going to go through it one step at a time and understand how the deployment process works. So if I go to my deploy script here, we can see that I have a script which goes through and does a deployment. So we'll put a breakpoint in here, and we're just going to run this Python code live and step through it together. So I'm going to click, click debug, and you'll see we end up here. So what we do is we go through each of the script files. So we just read the script files from the file system. And then what we do is we'll come back to this hash step. We'll skip that for now. We go ahead and we open up the file. So if I then go down to here and we see I've got my file contents, if I have a look at that, you can see this is the what we're just looking at, right? We just read from the file. Yes, you're going.
You may need to just zoom in for people, right?
Yeah, no worries.
Also, people in the room.
Yeah.
Only ones at the back.
I can zoom in on the code, but on the previews, I'm not sure how to do that. Unless anyone else knows how to zoom in on pie chart, honestly.
Those who teams can.
Zoom in. Yeah.
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 Oh, good.
Cool. No, good call though. And so then what we do is we go through each of the statements. So if we go back to our script file here, this is what I was just looking at. You can see each of these is delimited or separated by these 3 dashes. So each of these delimiters means that these are separate queries. So we just run through each one, split them up, and execute them against our database. So if we go back in here, we can step through and do that now. So you can see we go through each statement. So the first one we're going to execute will be our identifiers table. We go ahead and execute that statement, and then we go to the next statement. So if we were to now have a look at our local database, oops, and we were to refresh our schema, you can see now we have an ETF data. Oh, it's not okay. It isn't. You're right. It isn't showing the How is it? Can you still see it, Dan? The MySQL workbench, is that showing for you?
Yeah, that's showing on the screen.
Okay, cool. It's not showing on here though, is it?
Well, not MySQL workbench.
Oh, sorry. No, I'm still seeing that. Yeah, still seeing what you're thinking.
Oh yeah, okay, gotcha. So you're right. Yeah. Is it frozen or is it moving as I move? Because it says it's having trouble dialing in with Teams.
There's no movement that I can see right now.
Yeah, it does look like the screen's frozen.
It's fine.
Just call the news and ask us going.
I wonder, is it your internet?
Oh, it moved me onto the it moved me onto the guest.
Let's see.
Oh, I have to log back in. Sorry, 1 sec. I'm just joining the Teams meeting again.
Yep.
We got back. All right, sweet. So this is MySQL Workbench. So you can see in here now we have a ETF data schema that wasn't there before. So that's just been deployed. And if we look inside the schema, we can see that we have a table and we have our identifiers table that has all our columns that we just looked at with our type, unique, and description. So what we've done is we defined what we want our table to look like in a SQL file. And then using Python, we've gone and executed it into our MySQL database. And now we can see our table is here. So this works great for a first setup, which is awesome. And if we were to go ahead and continue through the other statements that we have, so we would just start running through here and say, okay, let's do our next one, next one, next one, next one, next one, and we'll go all the way down to when we're finished with this file. You'll see now if we go back to here and we hit refresh, we've got a bunch of other tables. We've got an instrument table, we've got a instrument identifiers table, and we have a weights table, which is the table we want to use. So that's great, nice and simple so far. And if we have a look at our weights table, oh God, that is so small. There is a column in there, which is tiny, called file ref. And that might be where we store something like the source of the data we use to populate our table, right? Now let's say that we decided we don't like file ref because it's too specific to a file, and we might source data from somewhere that's not a file, like an API. So we want to change our column from file ref to something else. Well, how do we go about doing that, right? So we might write another script. Let's say we deployed our first script into production and our database set up like this. How do we go about making a change to this column? Well, we might write another script. And if we go back to our PyCharm here and we have a look at our scripts, we can see we have a script named number 2. In this case, we're just going to change the name of the column. So we are saying that with our second script, we can be assured that the first script has already run. They'll run in order. And knowing that, we can make a change like this to change the name of the column. So if we go ahead and run this as well, we'll see that the name of the column will indeed change. So we go back to our deployment, and then we run through our next file, open up our file, make the change, come back in here and hit refresh. And reselect. You should see it's now changed to source. And what's really interesting is you might have noticed that if you're very eagle-eyed, haven't actually committed this yet. And what's really, really interesting, what we tried to do when we first set this up, was we wanted to make it so that if the deployment failed, because it is possible that when we run this script, it doesn't work, it fails. We want to roll it back, right? We don't end up in a position where we've executed 4 of the 5 scripts in a file and the 5th one has failed. How do we recover from that? We might have challenges recovering. Unfortunately, in MySQL, there's no way to roll back from a DDL statement, like creating a table. So once it's done, it's done. So we can't commit everything and then choose to either roll back or close our connection and have it fully go in. So we have to be a bit careful when we deploy the DDL changes. If there is a failure, we might need to look into it in a bit of detail. But that hasn't happened yet, thankfully. So now we can go ahead and we can just deploy the rest of our scripts. So I'll just click run and I'll get rid of these breakpoints and we will just deploy through the rest of our scripts. And you see that's now complete very quick. And we have 21 in total. So if we go back to our database and we refresh, we can see that all these tables that are showing up now, right? It doesn't necessarily matter if you can't read the name. You can see there's a lot more tables here than there were before. So now we have a database which is up and running. And this database is exactly the same as our one in production. It has exactly the same schema. The only thing that's different is the data inside it. It doesn't have the data we have in production, obviously. It's empty. So what's really helpful about doing this from a development perspective is that every change you make is versioned, right? So you saw those SQL files we looked at earlier. We're using Git. So if I want to go ahead and look at one of these files, and I'll just go.
Just one question.
Yeah.
And as you've got like multiple files with the same number, would it be reasonable to assume that then like all the twos don't have conflicting changes? And so obviously if there was conflicting changes, you put them obviously in the same file or something like that.
Yeah. It's a
Directly after each other.
It's a good question. Let's come to that right now. So first things first, we look at the versioning and we say annotate with git blame. Annotate with git blame. We can see when this change went in. Oh god, that's tiny now. But you can see this is me, and we put this in August 2021. Now, to your point, Bernie, there are actually exactly 2 files that have each number in front of them. There's no duplication in terms of SQL. Exactly, it's a hash of the contents of the SQL file. So for every file we have here, we have a hash of the contents, the SHA-256 hash. And you may wonder why that is. The reason for that is whenever we do a deployment and we go ahead and we run in our SQL, we actually have another table we set up right at the start, which I didn't show, which is a deployment table. In that table, we record the name of the file, we record the date, and we put in the hash of the file as well. And what that means is when we go to do a subsequent deployment, we will check the hash of each of these files against the deployment table. And if it's already in there, we won't deploy that script. So that allows us to be sure that we're going to have an idempotent result. No matter how many times we run this, we end up with the same thing. So if I go ahead and was to rerun this now and say, okay, let's just rerun the deployment again. Rerun, you'll see that goes and it's successfully completed. And if we look at our MySQL workbench, we'll see there's no change. All the tables are the same. We haven't ended up with duplicate tables or anything like that. Crazy, because actually nothing was deployed in this instance. But if only half our scripts had been deployed, we reran it, it would deploy the other half that hadn't been deployed yet. Because we keep track in this deployments table, which I'll show you now, which is this table here. It's so small. But what you have in here is you have the hash of the file here, you have the name, and then you have the date and time that we deployed the script.
So do you do the hash on creation on check-in at Git, or and then that you've got that script also drops that into the table?
Good question, right? Exactly. So what would happen if I came in and I said, all right, I'm going to change the first one and I'm going to change the hash as well. Or if I left it alone and changed the hash, would it redeploy? And so yes, it's done before you check it in. But how do we know someone hasn't changed the hash? We write a unit test, which checks that the hashes are correct and that they match. So then when we talk about peer review, we have when we'll actually show an example of this in a second. When I do a check-in, if I've changed the hash, but I haven't changed the contents of the file, which would mean that I'd actually deploy something I'd already deployed again, which is a big problem, the test would fail and it would never be deployed. If I changed the script that already existed and I changed the hash, well, then a peer review process should pick that up and say, why are you changing a script that already exists? That's not something that we do. We only add new scripts. Add script number 22. Don't change script number 1. And so that's the benefit of having that hashing in there as well. So let's say that we wanted to go ahead and do something with this database. Now that we've got a local one, we can obviously run tests now against it. So if I was to go and have a look at my tests, I have a number of tests that I can run against my database that I've deployed, because I have some business logic in this application that does things with the database and exposes the results via a well-defined interface. A well-defined number of methods can then be called via an API. If I go and have a look in my tests folder and I go test identify uniqueness as an example, we can see in here we have a test where we connect to the database and we check that if we have a unique instrument identifier, so the Refinitiv instrument code is unique ID, we should never have more than one instrument in our database with the same ID for that identifier type, we should get failed, so we can't insert it. And we've actually set up a trigger to make sure that that happens. So then we can go ahead and we can run this test. And then because we've done all this locally, we have the ability to run this test. We can see it passes, which is great. But we can also write new tests as we make changes to our application. So if I was to go and add new functionality, I can then add the new tables or change the tables if required, write new tests, and check all that in as a package, ready to be deployed, which feeds into our next step around how to actually get this into a live environment instead of just on a local machine. So if we wanted to make a change, say, for example, we wanted to add a new table, what we could do is we could go into our scripts folder. We could add a new script. So we could just copy one of these existing ones, call it number 22. We'd say add Azure meetup table. Cool. And then what we could do is we create a table. So I might just be a bit cheeky and grab already created table, whack it in here. And you might say something like, Azure meetup. We might put something in like, meetup ID, in person, description, something like that. Right, so we're going to create a new table. This is the main thing. This is obviously not relevant for this ETF use case, but we put in something relevant. So now we could go and deploy this. But before we do that, we first have to run our test, right, to make sure our script hashes are correct, like you said, Ray. So if I now go into my tests and I run my test for testing the script hashes, we can see we get a failure. And if we have a look, we can see that we have a file we've created, but we don't have a hash for it. So we'll never be able to check this in because this will fail in our pipeline. And as a good developer, I should run the test locally as well. So I see that it fails, I have to fix it. So maybe I go, okay, look, I'm a bit lazy. I don't really want to work out the hash. I mean, what am I supposed to do? Go on the command line and like find some hashing command, and how do I know it's exactly the same? Like I'll just copy one over, right, from this one instead. So that might be something I consider doing. So I want to get out of here on a Friday. So I'll go and take a hash from in here. I'll just paste it in. And there we go. Bob's your uncle. Happy days. Let's rerun our test. Oh shit. So our test failed again. This time it's saying not that there isn't a hash, but that our hash doesn't match the contents of the file. So this is saying that we expected this hash, but instead we had this hash. So being my lazy self, I'll just run the test and I'll grab the correct hash and put it in.
That's right.
There we go. Now I can rerun my test. Hopefully it should pass. Excellent. So that's now passed. So maybe now I want to go ahead and do my deployment. So I'll go and rerun my deployment here, run that. That's complete. We'll go back and look at our tables, and you see now I have an Azure meetup table, which we've just created. So it's now we can write some tests against it, whatever we need to do for a business use case. So the main thing I wanted to show here is just that it gives us a real, by deploying to the database like this, it gives us great confidence that locally we can have exactly the same setup, whether you're using MySQL you downloaded or using a Docker image, which is what I'm using here on Mac, I can deploy it and be confident it's exactly the same. So that even though when I do run my tests, I'm not going to have a situation where they pass on my machine and they don't work when it goes to production, right? Work locally, so it should work in production. Yeah.
It's a major version release. So you, from what you said, to run again, you don't tinker with the script. You just simply add scripts on.
That's right.
So,
Add only.
so if I've got a column that's got varchar 100, then
Yeah.
I'll make it varchar 250. Then
Mhm.
I need to find so there's an in varchar blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And there's multiple scripts. Do you ever have a point where you cut off and say, okay, let's do a export of the build
Mhm.
and then start at version 2 and then carry on from there? Is that
No. We should always be able to produce a database from inception, from the very first script.
okay?
The package is versioned. So this repository is published as a Python package to consume the APIs, and that package is versioned. But we don't do a cutoff where we say this is the state of the database. We'll start from here going forward or anything like that. No.
I think the extension, a question as an extension to that question is, if I'm working and I have point dot 0 dot some versions.
Yeah.
I only want to deploy 1 dot versions into production. So as a developer,
Yeah.
I would have created, let's say, 100 tables, right? And
Yeah.
for each table, I would have created a separate SQL file.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to have those many versions of database updates, but
Yeah.
I would want to combine them together just as one.
Yeah.
I guess my question is, when, as a developer, I know that my 0.5 is ready, and I can now move to 1.0 or whatever,
Yeah.
and I want to combine everything into one.
Yeah.
I guess is in a multiple developer situation, is there like a chance of conflict? In terms of a
Why would you want to move it into a version 1? So you're saying like you'd start with a brand new 001 that just sets everything up the way you want it? Is that what you're saying?
yes, I guess where I'm coming from is Django as well. So Django,
Yeah.
one of the web frameworks, actually does something similar when it comes to database migrations.
Yeah.
So what it does is it creates migration files for you as and when you create a database table, right?
Yeah.
Define a database table.
Yeah.
So it's an ORM framework. And what it does is it creates it for you, and it creates a lot of dependencies. So for example, if you're executing script number 1, and then you create script number 2, it says the dependency for script number 2 is script number 1.
Oh yeah.
So it has a chained dependency, right?
Yeah.
And it does that with the database entries as well as the file entries. So
Yeah.
in each and every file, you'll have that dependency,
Yeah.
same as the database itself.
Yeah.
So
Right.
what I found out is in a multiple developer situation,
Yeah.
you have conflicts because not every time you want to, let's say, run each and every, sometimes you want to combine these files together as one release
Okay.
and not, separate them out as,
Separate releases.
yeah. So
Yeah. I guess this comes back to the idea of continuous deployment. So if you're deploying and you can deploy this change in 20 minutes, why go and combine it all together into one big deployment? Why not just deploy it incrementally? There's no need. We don't have a release window once a quarter or once a month we need to adhere to. In that case, I think that makes a lot of sense. But if you're able to deliver and deploy this whenever you need to, and it only takes you 20 minutes, why take the effort to try and build it into a package that's consolidated and run the risk of there being conflicts when you can just say, look, these are all the steps. If you follow these steps, you get to the place we need to be. I would understand if you were starting a new database and doing things like, we walk through some of the things we're doing here. It's not just deploying the schema for a table, right? There are other things that we do in here. We have a look in our repository back in here, just a bit easier to see. You can see we also do things like we mess with triggers. So we might have some triggers in our database. So you can see here we're doing some changes to a trigger. This is enforcing identifier uniqueness. And to your point, you might say, well, if we've changed the trigger, why not just deploy with this one that works from the start and ignore the one that didn't work in the first place, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's actually simpler just to go all the way through from the start. And unless there's a compelling use case not to, then I'll just continue doing
yeah,
that.
it's the mistakes that we make that
Yeah.
we don't want to deploy in production, and that's what we want to skip.
Yeah.
Like, as an
Yeah.
example, the triggers, as an example.
But I guess
Only between the delta though, right?
Yeah.
It's only the bit that changed.
that's right. That's right. If we were to add that table like we just did, and we were to actually take that all the way through to production, the only thing we would run is that 22 we just did. All the others have already run, so they won't run again. But because they've already run, there's no need to consolidate. They've already run in production. It's incremental, always incrementally building from where we are. But I can imagine there could be use cases where maybe there's something you want to do around migration, but in our case, it's not something there's no value for us compared to just releasing continuously. So you can see in here, there's examples of changing triggers. Other things you might want to do is changing types. So this is a good example, Ray, like you said, I've changed the number of decimal places on one of the types to meet our use case. So originally we defined it wrong, didn't have enough decimal places. So we changed it to 7 decimal places. Some other things which may be quite interesting is here. So this is quite different to what I've shown you so far, right? And it's different because this is a value, right? Everything I've shown you so far is schemas and triggers. Here, I'm actually putting value into the database. Now, you might say, Mike, what the hell are you doing, right? Values come from using the database in my application. Why are you putting values in like this? You know, they're probably just they might get removed, more values might get added, and I totally agree. For our use case, though, we have a very tight interface on how the user can interact with the database. There are only a set of very well-defined methods that you can be used, and those methods don't allow you to touch this table. So we're confident that by doing this value creation, this is going to stay in the database, and it's basically a configuration for how the database operates. And we're not worried about these getting deleted because there is no way to do it, and we don't give users access to interact directly with the database. There's only a set of well-defined APIs that can be called that allow you to do things in tables. Interesting things. Oh yeah, there's one more I wanted to show, which is
Can you export these values from database, or do you have to write the insert statements yourself?
so what do you mean by export versus
Sorry, export from your local database.
Yeah.
As a script.
Well, I don't export it from the database. I write the script, I deploy it to my local database, and then I deploy it to my database in the cloud as well. But nothing moves from my local database to the database in the cloud. They're totally disconnected. There is no connection there whatsoever, nor is there a connection between my database and, say, UAT and production. They're completely independent. I'm just defining the scripts that will run in each environment to get to that position. So here's another example. This is creating an index. So maybe we've worked with our application in production and there's been some performance issues. So it's taken a lot longer than we expected to run some certain API calls. And we never noticed that locally because locally we've written some unit tests, but the volume is so much lower than what's in production. So we want to go ahead and create an index. Now, this is where it takes a lot of discipline to say, look, I could go into production where the data is representative of what the problem is, and I could just start creating indexes in production and see if that helps and see if that fixes the problem. No worries, I'll go create an index on this table. I know what the problem is. Boom, you create the index. Users say, oh, it hasn't fixed it. Shit. Now I've got an index in production I don't need, I don't want, didn't work. I regret doing that. How do I get away from that? So by having the discipline to say, look, I'm never going to go into production or any environment aside from my local environment and execute things like this. I might do some break glass to investigate, read only, but I'm not going to do any changing of stuff around. I'll then write this locally, run my unit tests. I might find that a test fails because it's something I didn't expect, fix it locally, then deploy it, then have it go through the pipeline. Then I can test again in production, right? And see if the index has done what I expect. So to recap, using this method, we're putting in things like schemas, indexes, triggers, and also in some use cases, values. You've got to be careful about values. Excuse me, what we discussed. So now if we have a look at how we actually take this into Azure, because everything I've shown you so far, aside from the repo, has been done locally, how do we, now we've made a change, we're happy with it, how do we get that into our database in the cloud? Let's have a look at a pipeline. So you can see here, I'm in Azure DevOps, and I've got two pipelines in here, one for tests and one for deployment. So whenever I do a check-in and raise a merge request, the unit test pipeline is going to run, and it's going to run all those tests. I only ran one test or two tests locally, right? It's hundreds. We run all those hundreds of tests. If any of those fail, it'll go red, which means I didn't run the test locally, most likely, why that would happen. And then once we have got the unit test passing and the change has been reviewed and approved, and we're happy to put it in, then it'll be merged into the main branch, and then we'll go through a deployment process. So if we have a look at the deployment pipeline, you can see we have a test, right, which runs again to make sure everything is passing. Then we deploy our database to UAT, And the way it's deployed to UAT is very similar to what we do locally. We connect to the database using a connection string, and we run through the scripts and we deploy. And then we deploy to production, and then we go ahead and this part on the end here, this publish database package, is so that then the APIs in this Python repository can be used downstream by other applications. But that's not relevant to actually deploying the databases. And so this gives us great confidence that once the change has been merged in, we can deploy it straight to our databases. And if we have a look, I mean, there's not really much to see in the UI here, but this is an example of one of the databases, the UAT database that we work with. And one thing I did want to bring up and open this to the floor, because it's something we haven't been able to achieve, is a gap we have in this process at the moment is the database settings. So think things like the collation types. That's caused everyone problems, right? We're using UTF-8, MB4, whatever it is. So really, that's something we want to have in our deployment scripts as well, but haven't been able to get it to work, unfortunately, so far. Because if we have a look at the settings, you know, the parameters, there are so many different parameters that do all sorts of different things. You know, max memory size, collation, and if we end up with different settings in here between what we have in UAT and production, it can have a very meaningful impact on our application. We can find things don't work at all in production that work in UAT, or things that work locally don't work at all in UAT or production. But it's critical these rely. Maybe that's something for deploying your database via code using the infrastructure as code. Bicep, yeah, like something like Bicep. Yeah. And maybe those two, and then together you have everything covered, right? Because we haven't been deploying this database via code so far. Cool. Yeah, so that's the main things I want to cover. So I'll open it to any questions anyone has about this.
So do you have drop DB or drop table?
I'm not sure if we have any drop tables, but it's, well, I mean, what is nice, right, is that if I did want to like play around and I wanted to go in here and I did just go, you know, drop schema, see you later, I can obviously redeploy locally. And then if the risk is that I'm going to potentially drop something in production and lose all the data, well, that's why we do it locally first and run the tests. And you would hope to God that one of your tests picks up that something is unexpected in that drop statement. So, but it's absolutely something that you could do for sure, definitely.
What's the strategy to, suppose not everything is live in production, right? So someone wants to build a product which is not in production yet. It goes by 3 months, 6 months life cycle.
Yeah.
And you do like 500, 600 updates on the databases. So you don't want to run the 500 SQL queries when you move to production. You just get to whatever passed in UAT. You just get the snapshot and deploy that in production. That will be your version 1. So what's your strategy for that?
I think what you're talking about there is incompatible with continuous integration, which is where I'm going to deploy to production at the same time I deploy every other environment. I'm not going to wait 3 months, 6 months to take a big massive change and deploy it to production.
So this scenario can be the 001 can be the first snapshot of the production.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So other things can be discarded once the release 1 has gone to the production. It can be 001.
Yeah, like 001 will go in, and then 002 and 003. But the point is, there's no big bang. I'm not going to try and do a big bang into production ever. I'm always going to incrementally move things into production. And the things I do ship should be complete enough that they are useful. I'm not going to prototype around and play around with stuff that's actually useful. It should be well defined, and I should split it up into useful chunks and deploy it continuously, as opposed to doing a big bang where I've like worked for ages on something and it works really good, and then I go and try and deploy it to the other environment, and it's just been 6 months, so many changes. There's been other changes there that I don't have because I'm rebased, and I end up with conflicts, and that's a world of pain.
So the version 1 starts when the first code is in production, right?
Yeah, so when that 001, when that was written, check in the git commit, merge, main to production.
And
you might have more than one in a commit, right? You might have 3 or 4 files in a commit. That's definitely possible. Yeah. But yeah.
And usually what happens when you deploy it to UAT,
yeah,
and you found some bugs and
yeah,
you have to fix it.
Yeah.
So so you wrote 3 updates.
Yeah. And
that should not go to production. So you correct them in the 4th update.
Yeah. Fix forward.
You're gonna make those 3 scripts run in production,
yeah,
then 4th one will correct that.
Yeah, fix forward. Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely try and fix forward as opposed to reverting. And even if we revert, it'll just be the inverse of what we deployed to undo it, right? So
is it worth to have two branches where you do all the experiments, do all the testings, and production will have a different branch
It's possible.
where you can just find the
You could do
whatever
that.
is working.
Yeah, you could have a development branch and you could batch it up a bit more. That's definitely something that could be done. Yeah, definitely. But if you're really going down the philosophy of continuous integration, it's my commit is in, I'm happy to ship that all the way to production. If there's a problem, I will immediately fix it for it or I'll revert it. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time building something up outside of production. It's iterative, each day, multiple times a day, deploying, to prevent that big bang approach. And that's the philosophy we're using.
Sorry, I just have some uncomfortable bit with the examples given about, you've done three scripts, stuffed up, you do a fourth script to correct.
Yeah.
Just wondering if that does irreparable damage eventually in production, as in, you've truncated a column or something of that nature, and there's a mistake, let's make it big again. But as the script runs through, you've truncated some data or something. That's probably not a great example, but
I think it's a good example. So the one bit we haven't shown here, which is the second part of deploying databases code, is all these scripts are like setup scripts, but I might also have a set of migration scripts, which are doing migration exercise. And that's where I'm actually moving data around. So in that example, I might have a migration script, which obviously we back up our database, right? So I might go and restore from a previous backup in that event. If we know it's going to truncate, then perhaps you're right. We wouldn't deploy that to production and we would remove the script from production, but we haven't encountered that yet. So we haven't had to cross that bridge. But I can see what you mean about that being something.
no, I appreciate what you're doing. It's great. I love the signing.
Yeah. That would definitely break the model of always doing forward. So we haven't come to that yet. We've had to say, we've deployed these three, hashes, and now we realize what a huge mistake it was because we're terrible developers and we missed something in our local development. And now we want to never deploy that to production because if we do, it's going to cause massive ramifications. Let's revert the commit. So those never existed. How do we fix that? I guess that would be something you probably, what I would think about just off the cuff is you would write some stuff to undo what you've done in UAT, and then you would basically have to update that deployment table to bring it in line with what's in production as well in your UAT environment, and then you deploy a prod like those never exist or something like that. But yeah, definitely more spicy than staying on the well-beaten path. Yeah.
Always trade-offs.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks very much, Mike. And
Thanks, guys.
those who come regularly here know that we always appreciate our speakers and all the effort and time that they put in to do our presentation. So, thanks very much.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you very much.
Tradition is to speak gives the ball to the person who asks questions.
There you go.
Mike had all the love to help him out. Do you want one of the groups to come up?
Yeah, to join the meeting. Do I need to share the screen explicitly on the call?
It is sharing.
Yeah. All right. So today I'll be talking about data mapping in Logic App. So whoever has worked on Logic Apps, they know that data mapping is never easy on Logic Apps before. So we had a couple of solutions before. We have inbuilt accents and we have uh, liquid operations, which are not inbuilt for Logic App, but we can import them to the Logic App to do the data mapping. So preferred apps for data mapping is mostly ADF or you do it on function apps. But yeah, recently data mapping has been a good exercise with Logic App, and Microsoft has released the data mapper inbuilt function for data mapping, which is a visual data mapping exercise. So you can, don't need to worry about missing commas or, putting parentheses, all those things. We'll discuss about all the ways you can do the data mapping in Logic App today. So yeah, those are the 4 data mapping solutions you can do with Logic App. One is the data operations. So each step in the Logic App is called actions. You have actions and triggers. So these are the actions which you can use to do the data mapping. One is the data operations, where you can do the minimal basic data operations, but it won't work with the complex where you have to loop through some certain of data types to do the mapping. And that mostly works with JSONs. And then there are XML operations where you have that's mostly used for the B2B scenarios, where you have to map the XML to JSON or XML to other data forms. Then we have the data mapping operation, which became GA last month. And then there is liquid operation, which is not a native operation of Logic App, but you can build it and import it to Logic App. So I have some hands-on exercise as well. I'll show you how we can use each of these 4 operations, actions, to achieve the data mapping. So I have been using the same file to convert from JSON to XML and XML to JSON, so that we can see how easy it is to use these 4, and which scenario we can use which operation in which scenario. So the data operation is, we have basic data actions where there are 6 or 7 actions available. Compose is where you create a string or a message from different inputs. Parse JSON is where you tokenize the JSON so that you can use it easily in the next steps. Create CSV table, creates the CSV table from an array, create HTML table, same, just an HTML table. Filter array, join, select, all these are array operations. That's for data operations. So as you can see, using these actions, you can do only limited data mapping. But then there are complex data mapping where you map the XML, like 1,000 lines of XML into 100 lines of JSON. And in that case, you will be writing each action for each operation. So that will be very hard to maintain. So this is just used for simple operations and JSON to JSON mapping mostly. Then we have XML operations, and in enterprise integrations, this is mainly used for B2B scenario, and you need an integration account to use this. If you are using the B2B scenarios, then you need the integration account. If you are using just a basic of format change, then you can do it without it. So it has the 2 actions: transform XML action, which transform the XML using XSLT to other formats, and then there is XML validation, which will validate the XML using a schema, right? And it works with AH2, X12, and artifact operations. For that, you need the integration accounts. Then we have liquid operations. So this is for more complex operations. And before data mapper, this is the, I think, widely used operation because it can handle large amount of data, as well as it has all the transforms. So JSON to JSON, JSON to text, XML to JSON, and XML to text. So you can notice that XML to JSON is not here, but you can use the text to achieve that. So you just write the text in the format of a JSON, and the output will be a JSON, right?
What did you mean? XML to JSON or JSON to XML?
Um, yeah, JSON to XML is not just right. Yeah, so JSON to text, you can write the text as XML format, and it will give you the XML output, right? Yeah, I guess that's all. Then we have data mapper, which becomes GA in November 15th. And it's the visual data transformation tool, which is very good because you don't have to worry about the schemas, and you have to worry about schema, but not syntax. And it works for both as well as XML to JSON and JSON to XML. And then, yeah, I have the POC ready for showing all these mappers. Let me save that. All right. So this is a logic app in Visual Studio Code. I've also deployed this into Azure, but maybe it will be better if we can do this with Visual Studio Code. Because in Azure, you'll just see the input and output, but here you can see how you can map it. Okay, so first one is the built-in string actions, which I showed, the data operations. And designer. So yeah, so here I'm trying to take a HTTP request, and in the body of this HTTP request is the payload that we want to transform. And this is the JSON schema, which we are parsing so that it will be tokenized. And this is the compose action that I have used. So if you see, here we are mapping it to JSON to XML, but it's just a string in an XML format. So the parse JSON has made all these as tokenized. So if we check here, we have the output. So that's the parse JSON. I don't know why it is coming on, right? So this is the parse JSON output. And if you see, these are the tokens. These are one token from that JSON property. So you can directly use those. It's pretty easy, but it's very simple. You can do only, a small amount of data operations. Like you see here, I'm doing some direct mappings. I'm doing some expressions. Yeah, I'm splitting something and taking the value here. So these are all simple operations which you can use using the built-in string functions.
Manja,
Let me see. Yeah.
did you have to hand roll that XML with the embedded, or did that get generated automatically?
Right. Yeah. I had the schema, so I created a sample and then just updated the body.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then so you plugged it in. Okay.
Yeah. Because it's always works with the small parts, so you don't want to use the data mapper for mapping something like 100 lines because it will take time. So yeah, that's for that we can use Liquid, but now we can use data mapper as well. So this is just for small. Usually the HTTP request and response are pretty small, so you can create the XML and put it in a HTTP request. So those kind of use case you can use this basic operations.
Are you saying it gets slow with bigger payloads? What gets slow? The developer?
No, it's
or the
it's
using it?
it's hard to maintain it. Like you can write like 1,000 lines here, but you don't want to maintain it because barely it's 20 lines and it's fitting in one screen. Like and it's a good chance that when you do some changes, you might accidentally omit something.
Okay.
So it's not advisable to do all this mapping inside this input. Right?
Yeah. Okay. Can you do like an array here? Because I see this is just a single.
Yeah, you can do anything there. So I can show you the options that we get. So suppose I'm trying to map email, right? So if you see here, there are two options here. One is for writing expressions, and one is for using the output from the previous steps. So if you write functions, you have like a whole set of functions that you can do. So these are all the actions you can perform, right?
If you have like a list of customers, can you do that, or does it only work with one?
Yeah. So no, you can do that. So that won't be done inside this one. But that's what the limitation is. If you have to loop through
So you mean
those
like,
complex operations, you have to move to liquid template. Yeah. Yeah, that's why it is called, it's a very simple operations where you have to do small mappings. That's when it is good. Yeah. So if you want to put an email, then you just use the built-in, just search for email, and you'll see the token from the payload, email, and that's it. And if you want to, like here in the flat number, I'm getting address line 1 and 2, and I'm getting the flat number from splitting it by slash and commas and everything. I'm getting that. So that I have written this expression, but it's still a simple expression. So you can do all these things, but when you do it 100 times, it's not easy, right?
When you write, so in the parse JSON step, it picks all the variables automatically for you.
Yeah, it creates the tokens. So whatever JSON properties you have, it creates the token. I'll show you all the inputs and outputs of each step so that it will be more clear. Just trying to get the Postman up.
So you can work with Azure Logic apps in Visual Studio Code. I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah.
That's really
Yeah,
cool.
standard.
Is that better than doing it in the website, in the web UI? You find it better?
I find it easy to debug.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also closer to code in terms of
Yeah.
from the infrastructure as code perspective.
Very cool.
Did you put back in the right fields from the one that had body email, but I thought it was going to be email address. When you deleted it and you put email back in, you had body email.
No, I think that should be just email, because it can't create new schemas. It will only create the schema.
Yeah, sorry, I just thought what was passed through from one before was body email, which I thought was what would be in the body of an email.
No. So yeah, I'll show you that. Body email means it's the body dot
Yeah.
email. Yeah.
Yeah, but you substituted, I think back when you touched your code, you substituted body email as opposed to email in that pass.
Oh, okay. So are you talking about this one?
Yes.
Still body email?
Yeah, I thought that was going to be email or whatever the term is for someone's email address. But you wanted to be the body of the email passed from earlier.
Okay, so
I the body of JSON, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the JSON property. So if you see here, that's the JSON schema. And if you see here, there will be a email. So that's what it says, body dot email. So this is the body, this is the email. Right. So, okay. So I'll just run this. The overview. So your HTTP workflow is working fine if you get a URL here. Looks like it failed. No, that's because it's still running.
You got the Postman plugin in Visual Studio Code, have you?
Postman now.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so now that all these workflows are ready, I think you'll be able to see the URL. Okay, Now you see the callback URL is there. That means your workflow is fine. There is no error in that. And now if I access this, this is built-in string actions. I put the URL there, and this is the body I'm sending. Okay.
Mhm.
And if I send that, all right, here is the XML. So that's the output from the logic app. And if you want to see the run, so you can see it here. So this is the HTTP request received, and this is the pass JSON. So this is the input, and if you see, the output is the same, but in the next step, you will find it tokenized. Yeah. Then there is compose map, and here is the input, and here's the output. Sorry, why the input and output are similar? Okay. Oh yeah. So this is the output, and we are putting that output inside the response. So we are just using that output in the body of the response. So that's just a simple operation of the mapping. Next, we can move on to the XML transform. So XML transform is the mapper for XML to JSON or XML to any other format. Here you will see we are doing from the transformation from an XSLT. So for that, you have to, get the XSLT built in before. So if you go to artifact here where you have the map definitions, maps and schemas. So I have the JSON schema, I have the XML schema here, and then there is mapping. So this is the XML to JSON XSLT, which we'll be using in this task. So if you go here, I'm using the XML to JSON schema mapping, and we're just using that output of the transform XML into the response body. And if you go to the mapping XSLT, so this is how we have done the mapping here. This is the this is also simple mapping, and because you're using XSLT, you can do a lot of things with the XSLT mapping. But I've done the simple mapping here because I'm using the simple input. But XSLT has the ability to call the .NET codes as well. I've not tried that, but that means it is very capable, and it can do complex mapping. And if you do for artifact and integration accounts, you can do much more things like uh, using the .NET code, using the functions, right?
What is XSLT? I never heard.
That's the Excel map, XML mapping.
Is that part of the XML specification?
Yes.
Cool.
Transformation.
Transformations.
Cool.
Okay. So I created this XSLT from the data mapper actually. I've not written this down. So I was doing the data mapper POC first, and it generated the XSLT. I just used it for the XML to JSON task as well. So you can use the same XSLT in multiple workflows. So that's handy. Coming to the testing, let's see. I'm starting it again. Yeah, this is started. Overview. I got the URL. That means everything is fine. And now to test it, let's see, XML transform. XML to JSON. Okay, so here's the XML, and I'm mapping it to JSON. You hit that, it uses the XLT and it will give you the JSON. Right. If you see, we got the same JSON that we are using in this one, right? Here. So I'm just trying to map it to and fro with the same set of payloads. So yeah, this is how we map it through XLT. But again, that's for XML to JSON, right? Mostly you have requirement to XML to JSON, JSON to XML in the same app. So it's better to use one that can do both. Or if you have B2B transformation, then you can use this one, right? And if I go to here, we'll see the run. Here is the input and output you can check, right? And we're putting that. These are all simple POCs, so it won't take like more than 5 minutes to create. And now we can check the data mapper. So data mapper. Is this out? All right. Many tabs. Oh no. Data. Okay, so this is the data mapper, and we have this task which uses the data mapper transform using data mapper. It takes the same thing as XML transform. It's a map source, it's logic app, and map name is XML to JSON. And this is the same XSLT that I've been using for XML transform as well. So here, how you can do the data mapping is you have to install the Azure tools and you have to install the data mapper extension. If you install that, you'll get this options here. So you can either load an existing data map or create a new data map. If you, I'll create a new data map. So you give some name, demo. Then you have to choose the source schema. You can either add new or select existing. I'll see if, okay, the existing is there. So I'll choose XML, add, that's the XML. And here you can choose the JSON. Click on add. So from the schema, it will give you the options. What are the fields you have? It's too large. I think I need to minimize this. Yeah. Is it visible? I'll just close this as well. All right. So this is the metadata, and inside metadata, we have 3 fields. If you want to map it, suppose sending system ID. So I want to do it a hard-coded value like system1. Yeah. So this is the custom value. I can put it directly in that. Same with the system version, like say v1. Custom value. Then timestamp is, so timestamp you can hard code, right? So timestamp you need to put an expression there. So there are added functions in here which you can use. If you click here, so functions, you'll see all these functions, right? And we need the timestamp, so we go to date and time, and there is a current date and time. if you select this one, it will appear here, and then you can just connect this. Sorry. I'm sure. It's as easy if you have a mouse. Right. So yeah, that's how you can use the functions. Suppose if you want to modify the functions output as well, then you have this plus symbol here. You can do more added operations on that, right? So you want to add one more date. So you can add date, use add date, or add year, month to date time. You can do that. And you can do a number of transformations on the functions as well, right? So that's the options you have, right? Then once you are done, you can just save it. The best part of it is you can test it as well. I think this is something wrong. I'll just remove this. Map it. Yeah.
I think it's actually like the main function.
All right. When I deleted that, it lost, right? Okay. So yeah, save it. You see generate XSLT here. Generate XSLT. Now you can test it. So you have to put the body here. Developer. Best part is you can test it individually, right? Why it is not? Yeah, there you go. So you can test every bit of mapping as you go, right? So you don't have to wait for the whole mapping to complete and then you do the map testing. You can do every bit of mapping as you go. That's one done. Then we can go back to the root and we can do the payload. So similarly, I think I have shown all the operations, but right now we have not mapped anything from the source to destination. We have done the hard-coded values and we have done the expressions. So now I'll show you how we can, choose something from the source element. So for the payload, suppose we are going for the customer ID, right? So here you can check select element. Yep. So it will show you what are the elements that are available. So for this one, let's do the address because it has multiple lines, right? Okay, let's do this and click on select element. Okay, now we have it here. And now if you see this one, we have so many things, right? And we want to map all of these into 2 lines. So we might need more than one field. What you can do is you can click on this and right click on this. You can add children, right? So you don't have to, select each one of them and map it exactly. You can take the root folder and select all children and you'll find all the children listed here. Now I want to map flat number, building number, street name, town, country into line 1 and state, postcode, address, country into line 2, right? So how we can do that? So for state, so first I map it to line 2. Then I need to add, it's irritating. Okay, so yeah, I add a plus here and I need to concat postcode and address country, right? So I just search for concat function. There you go. And you have 2 fields here. One is already here. That will be your state. It's already there. And you want to put a comma there in between the state and the other fields, postcode. Then you need to add one more field there. And where you need, sorry, either you can choose from here state and postcode, or you can, connect the arrows here as well. One more field for comma, and one more field for last field country. Yeah. Now you see that's how it looks. So everything goes into this concat function and out goes to the line 2. Now if you save this and test it, now you get it, right? The address line 2 is mapped. Okay. So it's super easy here. And you can do a variety of functions on top of functions. So it can do complex mapping as well. But I don't think it still can do the looping, but I have to explore that. I didn't get much time to explore than that, but I think we can do that using the logic app operations. May not be the data mapper, but I think we can check here if we have the loop function. No. We
Try
don't.
for each. Yeah.
For each.
For each. Yeah. So I guess they're adding data maybe. So we have again it's
Oh, man.
average count, direct tester, distinct filter, index, maximum, reverse sort. It can do a lot of things, but not all of the things maybe. So we still have some use for liquid template after all. Okay. Yeah, it's all about how you design the actions. You can get the, you have XSLT, you can and XSLT can use .NET code, or you can use liquid template, which is already doing all the things. So yeah, this is how you can use the data mapping. And once you do the data mapping, you can the XSLT and the map definitions will be already be available here. So if you see demo LML is already created. So once you save that, and you can use that in the mapping here, right? The map name that will get you the XSLT to be used here. And let's see the sample. We have to run it. So you run it. Once the run is complete, you can check the URL. Okay. You go to the overview. You'll see the URL. And if we use that, this is the data mapper. Taking a bit of time, but yeah, there you go. Right, so that's how we can use the data mapper. But then we have liquid template, which is the most complex, which can do the most complex operations. And here, if I show you, we are still doing the JSON to XML here. And for liquid, oh sorry, I haven't shown you this one, right? But yeah, it's a simple, mapping. You'll see the input and output, like the tasks.
What's the difference in the LML and the XSLT files?
The XSLT is the, the mapping, but map definition, I don't know, the source, the destinations and all other configuration maybe there in the LML.
See, LML what generates the XSLT, like just like the BizTalk map mapper DMP files used to generate XSLT.
could be the same. I have not used that, but yeah, if you see here, it has the source, input, output, source schema, target schema, all the the configurations, and accessibility is the actual mapping of those using those configurations, right? So yeah, I think the LML generates the accessibility because that's why we get the a generate accessibility option in the mapping. Yeah,
Is that an Azure format in the LML?
I don't know.
It'll be a proprietary format for.
It says life cycle modeling language, something to do with the modeling.
What did it look like when you click on one of the?
Oh yeah, it's just a JSON.
Right,
Yeah, and not even JSON.
right. It's just the definition then.
Yeah. So you have the input, output, so schema, destination schema, namespace. Yeah. Right. Cool. Then we have the master of all liquid templates. Is that? So this is the liquid template. This looks very, very small, but you can do everything here for each loop, the mapping, the all kind of string functions that you can imagine. There's a whole list of operations that you can do, flow, mathematical functions, and yeah, all kind of things you can do that is required for a mapping. And it can, I have written like 500 lines of mapping in liquid template, and it takes like 1 to 2 seconds. So it's quite fast considering all the complex mapping, looping, and everything we do. And that's the best part of it. And you can use variables and constants, things like that. So it's very interesting to use. It's almost like a coding language, but just for mapping. Yeah. And for the liquid mapping, again, you have to write this liquid template mapping where you have to, but the downside of this is the documentation is shit. You'll find that somewhere it is written you have to use quotes to get it as this output, but sometimes it works without the quote. I would say the documentation is not complete, or you have to find the correct documentation, correct version. So those kind of challenges are there, but data mapper with data mapper, I'm happy that I don't have to worry about the quotes or braces and everything. But yeah, it's a hit and trial with liquid template from my experience. But yeah, it does the work. So if you see here, that's how we can do that. This is the JSON to text format, and we are using the XML. We have written the text in form of XML. And I have a complex mapping somewhere. Not sure if I can bring it up, but yeah, I have some examples where you can use for each loop, and you can use constant variables and mathematical functions. I should have prepared that, but yeah, I'll show you how we can use this liquid template in the mapping. It's pretty much similar. Same, you have this transform JSON to text options. If you want to see what are the other liquid options, you can add action and search for liquid. So you have all these options: transform JSON to JSON, JSON to text, XML to JSON. So I'm using JSON to text, but the text is in format of XML. And I'm using the JSON to XML dot liquid. So if you see the code view, I think it will have the dot liquid. Yeah, the JSON to XML dot liquid. The UI doesn't show the extension, but that's the code view. And yeah, once you write it down, yeah, the other advantage of data mapper is you can test the accessibility, but here you have to write it down and run the logic app to see the output. And you have to check the output, what is missing, what is extra. So based on that, you have to do the changes. So that's the drawback of the liquid template. One more drawback, but it does the job.
Sometimes it takes longer to develop.
Yeah. It's tricky, but once you get hold of it, you keep reusing those. So because the operations are limited, So you kind of get hang of it. But yeah, it takes time to get used to it.
But you can write and test liquid templates independently in another tool. Like there's online tools that give you more immediate output. The thing to be careful of is there's multiple flavors of liquid. and
Exactly.
multiple versions of it.
Exactly.
What works in some things may not necessarily work the same way in my.
Yeah, we learned that hard way. We compile that in the online tool, and in the online tool we get one output, but here when we use it, we get a different output or it throws error. So yeah, like I said, it's not perfect, but it does most of the job. Right. So if I run it, oh, it's already running. I'll liquid mapper. Overview. Running. So if I saw here liquid template, JSON to XML. This is the body. JSON body, and we'll send it. Like get the XML. And like you see, this is the problem with the liquid template. Ideally, it should come in one line when you use the parentheses, but it comes as 2 lines here. Yeah. That's when you have to figure out whether to use inverted commas or how to fix that. That's a pain sometimes. Yep. And if you see here, you'll see the input and output. That's pretty much similar to what we have seen before. You see it's coming in one line here. Yep. So there are some inconsistencies, but again, does the job. So yeah, over time, Logic App has improved a lot, and we are getting more and more connectors, more and more operations. So hopefully, we'll have even more complex operations with the data mapper in future. That's all. Any questions?
Thanks, Ranjan. That was an excellent presentation. Of course, we appreciate all your time and thank you for putting that together. So thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, wait, there's more. So every month, my co-organizer or co-partner in crime, has been putting together those Azure presentations at the beginning of the month, as well as helping me with various organization aspects. So being the last meeting of the year, I just want to show the appreciation, Damien, for thank you very much. And as I mentioned before, we're not allowed to be in this room unless we have somebody from Microsoft. So for the past several months, Bernie has been donating his time to stay here late at night and make sure that we don't trash the place and everything. So thank you so much. Fantastic. So 2 great presentations tonight. Thank you again to our presenters. Thank you everyone for coming out tonight. I hope to see you all in January. I think it's 10th of January is our next meeting. Todd Whitehead, he always comes up with some very, very special presentations, usually with all kinds of effects. I have like the lights and everything else happening.
For Copilot, if you can bring in this flight simulator as well.
Right.
Keep bringing it in.
What did he do for this Commodore 64? And I think it might
Yeah, and I had a flight simulator streaming, and he was doing a streaming data thing once as well.
amazing. So yeah, definitely looking forward to that and seeing you all in January. 2 things that I asked of you before you leave tonight, if you brought any drinks or bottles or anything, you can break them out, that would be great. And also we've been asked if you can leave your name tags, please. If you really want to keep the